My name is Elaine Walker, and I am 63 years old. I never thought I would have to say this out loud, but sometimes the truth of who you are and how you are treated needs to be spoken, if only to keep your heart from breaking in silence. I am a mother of one son, Daniel, and for most of my life I believed he was my anchor. The reason I worked long hours, the reason I stayed up during the nights when the world felt heavy. I poured everything I had into raising him, convinced that one day, when he was grown, respect and love would come back to me in ways that would make the years worth it. That day never came. The ballroom smelled of fresh roses and champagne, strings hummed from a quartet near the corner, and the glow of chandeliers bounced across polished marble floors. I was seated near the front, not by accident. I had paid for half of what surrounded us. The flowers, the catering, the musicians, even the gilt-trimmed chairs, my name was behind the check. I sat quietly smoothing the fabric of my blue dress, willing myself to disappear into the background, proud but nervous. Then her voice cut through the air, cold, sharp, ruthless. "Elaine, this seat isn't for you. Please get up." The words came from Olivia, my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, spoken loud enough for the guests behind me to lift their eyes. She wasn't whispering. She wanted it heard. Her manicured finger pointed directly at me the way one might scold a child. My son sat beside her, stiff in his tuxedo lips, pressed tight. He didn't look at me. Heat rushed to my face as whispers slid across the room like ripples in water. I rose slowly, gripping the edge of my chair for balance. My heels clicked against the marble as I stepped away, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing into my back. I had never felt smaller. In that moment, as laughter and chatter resumed around me, one thought burned clear. If my own family could erase me so publicly, what else would they be willing to take? I stepped out of the ballroom and into the hotel corridor, the heavy doors closing behind me with a muffled thud. The air outside was cooler, quieter, but it did nothing to ease the tightness in my chest. I pressed my back against the wall, my palms trembling as though I had been caught doing something wrong. Except I hadn't. I had done nothing but show up as a mother at her only son's wedding. The laughter inside carried faintly through the doors, punctured by clinking glasses and music. It was surreal, like standing outside a world I had been banished from, a world I had worked tirelessly to build. Every bill I had paid, every sacrifice I had made, all locked behind that door, and I was left holding nothing but shame. I wanted to believe Daniel would come after me. Just a few words, just the smallest defense. I kept staring at the handle, expecting it to turn, expecting his face to appear. But the seconds stretched into minutes, and the hallway remained empty. That was when the betrayal sank in deeper. Olivia's cruelty didn't surprise me entirely. There had always been a distance in her smile when she spoke to me, but Daniel's silence, his refusal to meet my eyes, cut like a blade. He wasn't protecting his bride's pride. He was abandoning mine. I moved toward a small bench near the elevators, lowering myself carefully. A couple of guests walked by, their eyes darting to me before quickly shifting away, as though they had stumbled upon a stranger rather than the groom's mother. I folded my hands in my lap, forcing them still, and whispered to myself, if they can humiliate me this easily, what else are they hiding? That thought did not leave me. It grew restless and sharp, waiting for the moment I would act on it. Sitting in that hallway, I couldn't stop my mind from drifting backward, tracing the steps that had brought me to this exact moment. The signs had been there, subtle at first, like hairline cracks in a foundation no one wants to admit is failing. I remembered the first dinner I ever had with Olivia. We were at a quiet restaurant in town, white tablecloths, soft music, the kind of place where conversation should flow easily. But it hadn't. Olivia smiled politely, spoke in a tone smooth as glass, yet every answer she gave felt measured, as though she were checking boxes in an interview she didn't want to attend. She complimented the food, but never once asked me about Daniel's childhood, about our family, about anything that would weave us together. Instead, she talked about vacations. She wanted to take houses she hoped to buy, and how building a life required partners who didn't let sentiment get in the way of ambition. Daniel had laughed nervously, brushing off her sharp edges with jokes, but I caught the tension in his jaw. It was the same look he used to give me as a boy when he'd done something wrong and hoped I wouldn't notice. As the months went on, phone calls grew shorter visits, less frequent. When he did come by, Olivia was always there steering conversations away from anything personal, like she wanted to erase the parts of him that connected to me. I tried to tell myself it was just the growing pains of a new relationship. That's what love does, doesn't it? It shifts priorities. But as I sat on that bench outside his wedding, the memory of those dinners, those small silences played over and over until I could no longer deny it. Olivia hadn't been building a bridge. She had been dismantling one. The more I thought about it, the more the wedding itself felt like proof of how far things had shifted. I had told myself I wanted to contribute because that's what parents do, help their children start their new lives with dignity. But when the bills began stacking up, I started to see the truth more clearly. It began with the venue. Olivia sent me a brochure of a grand hotel ballroom in downtown Chicago, the kind with ceilings so high you feel small just walking in. The price tag nearly made me choke. I suggested something more modest, a lakeside lodge or even a vineyard nearby, but she dismissed my ideas with a smile that carried no warmth. Daniel and I deserve the best, she said. This isn't about saving money. It's about setting the tone for our future. Those words should have been my warning. Still, I signed the checks. Then came the catering, the floral arrangements, the music, every detail more extravagant than the last. Each time, Olivia would phrase it as though she were inviting me to be part of something beautiful. But in truth, it felt like I was being managed, directed into my role as financier. Daniel rarely spoke up during those conversations. When he did, it was to remind me softly that this was important to him. I wanted so badly to believe him that I ignored the weight in my chest. But looking back now, sitting outside that ballroom, I understood the pattern. My presence had never been required at the wedding, only my signature on the checks. They wanted my money, not my voice. And in that painful realization, something hardened inside me. If I had been reduced to a wallet in my own son's life, then perhaps it was time to close it. I don't remember how long I sat there on that bench, staring at the gold carpet and the pattern that swirled like waves beneath my shoes. People passed their perfume lingering for a moment before fading. Each time the ballroom doors opened, a swell of music burst out, joyous, careless, as though I had never existed. I thought of slipping away quietly, going home and pretending I had simply fallen ill, but that would mean accepting their version of me, invisible, disposable. No, I could not let that be my story. My hands shook as I reached into my purse, pulling out my phone. For a moment, I only stared at the black screen, my reflection faint in the glass. Then with a breath that burned my lungs, I dialed a number I knew by heart. Hello? A voice answered, warm, steady, familiar. It's me, I whispered. I need you to come. There was no hesitation, no barrage of questions, just a simple reply, I'll be there. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my bag. My pulse slowed, though my body still trembled. That small act, reaching out, refusing to vanish, felt like the first stone dropped into still water, sending ripples I could not yet measure. I rose from the bench and walked toward the lobby. The chandeliers above cast fractured light onto the marble floor, and for the first time that day, I lifted my head high. Let them laugh behind closed doors. Let them toast without me, because I was no longer waiting for someone to open the door. I had opened another one for myself, and I knew when help arrived, it would not be to console me, but to stand beside me. The hotel lobby was a blur of polished marble, hushed conversations, and the faint clinking of glasses. I stood near the revolving door hands clasped in front of me, waiting. My heart raced with the same nervous energy I used to feel before speaking at school meetings when Daniel was a boy. Then through the glass, I saw him Pastor Harris. Tall, broad-shouldered, his silver hair catching the light, he walked with the calm authority of a man who had spent his life guiding others through storms. He wasn't just my pastor. He was an old friend, one who had seen me at my strongest and weakest. When his eyes met mine, they softened, but there was fire beneath. He didn't need an explanation. The phone call had told him enough. He stepped inside, clasped my hands in his, and said in a voice meant only for me, "You don't have to stand alone anymore." The ballroom doors swung open just as we turned. Laughter spilled out, then hushed as people noticed us. A ripple moved through the crowd. Whispers traveled like wind through tall grass. I saw Olivia's face pale, her perfect smile falter for the first time that day. Daniel froze at the head table, a glass raised halfway to his lips. His eyes darted between me and Harris, uncertainty clouding his expression. We didn't storm in. We didn't shout. Harris simply placed a steadying hand on my shoulder and guided me through the doorway, his presence a silent shield. Every step echoed against the tile, louder than the music, louder than the whispers. For the first time since the day began, I wasn't shrinking. I was walking back into that room with dignity, and with every eye on me, I felt the tide begin to shift. The music trailed off as though the band itself sensed the weight settling over the room. Forks paused mid-air conversations cut short. It was the kind of silence that prickled against the skin. Pastor Harris didn't waste time. He stepped forward with the calm dignity of a man who had no fear of disapproval. His voice carried not booming but steady enough to reach every corner of the ballroom. I was invited here not by the couple, but by the woman who helped make this day possible. He set his hand resting lightly on my shoulder, and yet I find her standing outside, unwelcomed, unacknowledged. Tell me, is this how we honor the ones who raised us? The question hung in the air like smoke. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes flickering toward Daniel. Some nodded, others looked down at their plates ashamed. Olivia's cheeks burned crimson. She tried to laugh it off, muttering something about miscommunication, but the pastor's gaze never left her. Then his eyes turned to Daniel. "Son," he said, voice softer now, almost sorrowful, "your mother gave you life. She stood by you when you were too weak to stand on your own, and today she is cast aside like a stranger. What kind of man begins his marriage by dishonoring his own blood?" Daniel's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His hand gripped the back of his chair, knuckles white. For the first time, I saw something crack through his polished surface, guilt raw and unguarded. I stood beside Harris, my pulse hammering, watching my son struggle under the weight of truth. The crowd had turned. The whispers that once mocked me now pressed against him against Olivia, and in that moment I realized the silence was no longer mine to bear. It was theirs. Daniel's face was a storm jaw, clenched eyes darting from me to Harris, then to the crowd that waited for his answer. For years he had been a man of measured words, cautious and diplomatic. But now silence only sharpened the blade hanging over him. A guest near the back spoke first, a woman I barely knew but remembered from church picnics. She was sitting in the hallway, she said softly, though the quiet carried her words further than she intended. I saw her there alone. Another voice rose firmer this time. I heard what Olivia said when she told her to leave. Don't pretend this didn't happen. The murmurs grew bolder, less like whispers and more like accusations. Each word weighed heavier, pressing down on Daniel. His bride's hand tugged at his sleeve, her lips curled in a brittle smile meant to charm, but her eyes were sharp with warning. Say something, Olivia hissed under her breath, though loud enough for those nearby to hear. Daniel's lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time in years, I recognized the boy who once clung to my hand on his first day of school. There was fear there, but also shame. Shame he couldn't mask. The pastor did not press further. He simply folded his hands in front of him, weighting his silence louder than any sermon. And then slowly the applause began, not for the couple, not for the spectacle, but for truth. It started with one pair of hands, then another, until the room was filled with a sound that was not celebration but solidarity. I stood there trembling not from humiliation this time, but from something closer to vindication. The applause faded into an expectant hush, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Daniel's shoulders rose and fell heavily, his hand still gripping the back of his chair like a lifeline. Olivia's nails dug into his arm, her whisper sharp enough to cut. "Don't you dare," she hissed. But Daniel's eyes stayed on me. The boy I once knew flickered through his gaze, scared, cornered, yet desperate for release. His voice cracked when it finally came. "She's right," he said so quietly at first that I wondered if I imagined it. Then louder, his words tumbling out, unpolished, raw. "Mom shouldn't have been treated that way. Not today. Not ever." Gasps rippled across the tables. Olivia stiffened beside him, her face drained of color, but Daniel pressed on, each sentence trembling, but truer than the last. I thought keeping the peace meant staying silent. I thought it was easier to let things slide. But it wasn't peace, it was cowardice. And I let it happen because I was afraid of losing someone I love. His voice faltered, and for the briefest moment his hand brushed against Olivia's, then fell away. But in doing so, I nearly lost the one person who has always loved me without condition. The words landed heavier than any accusation. Olivia's mask cracked the brittle charm replaced by fury. "So you'd humiliate me? On our wedding day," she snapped, her voice shrill against the steady quiet of the room. Daniel didn't answer her. He looked at me instead, eyes brimming with a regret that felt both too late and not late at all. And in that fragile silence, I realized the fracture had widened beyond repair. Olivia's composure shattered like glass. She yanked her arm free from Daniel's grasp and turned on me, her voice rising sharp enough to slice through the heavy air. "You've poisoned him against me from the start," she screamed, her words trembling with rage. "You couldn't let us have one day, just one day, without inserting yourself into it." Her accusations echoed off the ballroom walls, but instead of sympathy, she met only stares, cold, unblinking, unforgiving. Guests who once clapped for her entrance now recoiled, their shoulders stiff, their eyes narrowed. A man from Daniel's office spoke up, his tone clipped. "Respect goes both ways. What you did to his mother, that isn't respect." A woman from the church choir shook her head. "Humiliating a parent on their child's wedding day, that's not strength. That's cruelty." The words piled up, not shouted, but spoken with the quiet certainty of truth. Olivia looked around, desperately searching for a single ally, but found none. Even her own bridesmaids sat frozen, their smiles, wilted eyes fixed on the floor. Daniel stood in silence, his chest heaving, torn between the woman he had promised to stand beside and the mother he had nearly abandoned. And for the first time, he didn't step forward to defend Olivia. His silence spoke louder than any rebuke. The pastor's voice came again, not angry but steady. "A marriage built on dishonor cannot stand. You wanted a celebration, Olivia, but what you've shown us tonight is a warning." Olivia's hands shook as she reached for her bouquet, clutching it like a weapon, but the flowers only trembled in her grip. And just like that, the crowd no longer saw her as a bride. They saw her as the woman who tried to erase a mother. The room felt unbearably still, every breath weighed down by what had just unfolded. Olivia stood rigid, clutching her bouquet as if it could hold her upright. Daniel's gaze stayed fixed on her for a long, unbroken moment. Then slowly he turned toward me. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse, stripped of the polished tone he used for the world. "I'm sorry." The words were simple, but they cracked something open inside me, grief and relief colliding all at once. For years I had carried the quiet ache of being unseen, pushed aside in the name of appearances. Now, in front of everyone, he pulled me back into the light. Olivia's fury rose again, but this time no one listened. Her words fell flat, bouncing against walls that no longer held her power. One by one, guests turned their eyes away from her, some even standing to leave. The celebration she had fought to control dissolved into a hollow shell, and no charm or smile could salvage it. Daniel stepped closer to me, his hand tentative as if asking permission. I let him take mine, and in that gesture, the distance between us shrank, not erased, but bridged. The pastor cleared his throat, his words softer now. Honor begins at home. A marriage may falter, but family, if we choose to protect it, can endure. As we left the ballroom, the cool night air wrapped around me like a balm. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking alone. Daniel walked beside me, his silence no longer heavy with shame, but with intention. The wedding had fractured, but in its ruins lay a truth too solid to ignore. Respect for a parent is not optional. It is the foundation of love itself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.